What was it that interested you about this Robin Hood series that made it stand out and something you had to be a part of?
You understand?
Yeah. We always get mixed up who starts first, but I just thought it was an opportunity to portray a society that was going through a lot of political and religious turmoil, and the two opposing sides, the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans, who are relatively newcomers to the British Isles. And I was very excited to play the part of the Sheriff of Nottingham, of course. And I think the fact that we had 10 hours of very well written drama to explore was certainly attraction for me, and I felt I could flesh out and bring this in very complex, very interesting man to life. Regardless of his crimes against the Anglo-Saxons, he was also a human being who was a loving father, and he was simply trying to keep the community together, and had a huge amount of responsibility on his shoulders. So I think I looked at it from that prism rather than just being an out-and-out villain, which I think is going to be quite, superficial, quite boring sometimes, actually.
How about you?
Oh, me? Well, I think that it was just really interesting to take something that feels like an adventure story, like a great kid's story, like, a little bit like, any of those tales that we tell kids that are about adventure and fighting and so on. And here instead, this idea of disappearing into the forest away from the authorities and to make your own merry band of brothers, that kind of stuff was replaced instead by like the real stark historical context of the period, and a lot of historical detail that gave like a depth to the story that I hadn't realized was there, and then bringing in like the incredible historical characters of Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, and a whole lot of other characters, including King Henry, whom you don't see, but
Mm.
and also like some situations that are so interesting. And it was a real pleasure to build a character and to start, just like weaving
Yeah,
all of these historical details into the fabric of the story itself.
having the time to
Yeah.
do that. Yeah,
Hmm.
great.
And before this, did you have a go-to Robin Hood, one that was like your favorite? And how does this telling of the Robin Hood story different from the one that you liked? You
No, I
enjoyed?
didn't actually go back and rewatch any of them. I wasn't, the scripts themselves were really powerful in bringing this into like a completely new
Yeah.
territory. This is a new story. Yes, the sort of like core is there, but now it's a different story.
Yes, yes. It's sometimes useful to do that, to look back and see, like other productions that have been done in the past. But I felt with this one there was such a richness and depth in the script that I didn't want to be influenced by
Yeah.
anyone else's
Same here.
performance, and I wanted to start afresh with my interpretation.
Well, I've seen a few episodes. I like what I see, and I like that it is something completely fresh. And I'm looking forward to seeing much more. So thank you very much for your time today, and best of luck with the series.
Thanks so
You.
much.
Thanks very much.
But whenever I start a series like this that's based off of a familiar property or something that I've known before, I always wonder, how do you make it your own? So that's my first question for you. How did you make this Robin Hood story your own?
I think for us, the core idea was to make it an origin story, to really go back further. When we meet Rob in our version, we meet him when he's a boy. Unlike most versions, he's pretty much already, Robin Hood. So to tell that story of, who he was as a boy, his family, the community he lived in, the oppression that they were living under, and, the tragedy that led to this sort of anger and desire for vengeance in him that morphed, into this rebel, into this sort of freedom fighter, and eventually a hero. So for us, is an origin story, entry point.
And then I think to ground it, the
Yeah.
idea of grounding it and making it more human and more relatable than a lot of Robin Hood stories are. A lot of them are larger than life, with a little bit of a comedy element, a little bit of almost a pantomime element. And So the idea of doing something that felt more realistic, more grounded, more historically connected, and it wasn't about it being historically accurate, but it was about it making it historically believable. And I think making the show feel historically believable and the world feel believable was a big part of, the fresh take.
Yeah, and I feel you accomplished that. But what kind of liberties and what kind of constraints were you given when you decided how to tell this story?
Oh, I think the constraints were all self-imposed. We didn't want to go too far out of the bounds of, where it would, like Jonathan said, it being human and it being grounded and it being emotional. Those does create certain guardrails, for you as writers and directors. But it's, we didn't want to be a slave to the history. We just wanted it to be believable, in a real way. But really personal. Make our version of it feel very personal, very human. In a way that some versions have, I think, gotten there, but that was our real focus. Like we were really focusing on that.
Yeah.
And I have a two-part question. For someone who is a Robin Hood fan, why should they watch? And for someone who doesn't know Robin Hood that well, why should they watch?
Well, if you're a Robin Hood fan, as we both were, and I certainly am, and I've been a Robin Hood fan my whole life, and I've loved and watched all of the Robin Hood movies and TV shows. I grew up watching a great Robin Hood TV show, an English show called Robin of Sherwood, with Michael Praed and then Jason Connery, and but I think what I missed in a lot of the films and TV shows is something that we've touched on already, which is just characters that are a little bit more relatable, a little bit more gritty, a little bit more believable. Action and violence that's a little bit more violent. The Middle Ages was a period that was tough and hard, and I love Vikings, for example, the show Vikings. John's a big fan of Peaky Blinders. And, when you kind of think about Peaky Blinders and Vikings, our Robin Hood very much comes out of a sort of composite of those two shows. And so, we wanted the show to feel violent and shocking at times, but we also wanted the world to feel very beautiful and lavish and romantic. We wanted a very strong romance to the story, because Robin and Marian are actually, it's a big part of the original mythology of Robin Hood as well. It's very much about Marian and Marian's story as well. So their love story, the romance, was always a big part of it, and I think that makes it this version a little different as well.
And if you haven't watched it, or, if you don't know much about it, I would say that it's a story of human perseverance, when it comes right down to it. It's universal in that sense, and it is the story of like the small guy, the small gal, like rising up, and refusing to sort of take it anymore. And I think that's something that always draws me to stories, to particular themes. And also, it's a phenomenal love story. I mean, the love story at the center of it is really beautiful. It's very strong, and even in the love story, there's this division of class. Marian is, from the upper class, the Norman world, and Rob is the son of a Saxon forester. So they have all of these odds set against them from the start. But it's a story at the end of the day of triumph,
Yeah, triumph of the human spirit, and class, as John said. It's which is really important and something we can, I think, all relate to today.
Well, I got to say, I'm really enjoying it. I wasn't sure what to expect. I was a little worried. Is this going to be very soapy, or what am I going to get? And it's got a nice edge to it. And it's based in, like, the characters are fleshed out, and there's some depth there. So I'm really enjoying what I've seen. I can't wait to watch more. So thanks, guys.
Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
man.
Thanks.
Have a great day.